Our budget is tied to achieving an outcome by a hire date with a specific level. And so the question is, are we going to hit that hire date? Are we on target to hit that hiring plan? Because that's an important output to achieve our business outcomes.
We're the Headcount People. Our podcast talks about all things headcount management, and our guests are the masters. If you're in charge of planning, managing, or reporting on headcount and headcount spend, we'll help you crack the code on this delicate dance by giving you strategies and tools from the masters themselves. Make sure to subscribe and follow for every new episode right when it drops. Here's your host, Tushar Makija.
Hey, Somrat. Good to see you again today.
Good to see you.
For all our listeners, I met Somrat almost a year ago when we were researching and building on the early idea of headcount planning and headcount management with Team Ohana. And how I got introduced is that Somrat, lots of experience, has built big teams, manages a big budget, now at Gusto as the head of the embedded payroll product, and is also very opinionated on how to build teams and how to do headcount management. So I reached out to Somrat for advice on what we should be doing. And it's been a great year learning from his experience. So today I invited you to actually share some insights and your experience with a wider audience. Somrat, do you want to just start by introducing yourself for the audience bit?
Yeah, sure. So, Somrat, I work at Gusto. I run a new emerging business within the Gusto portfolio, which is our embedded business line, which starts with payroll. Previously, I was responsible for business developments across all of Gusto, from strategic partnerships to managing our technology ecosystem, our developer platform, and doing distribution deals. Previously, I been part of early stage companies, mid stage companies, and I've founded a few companies along the way.
Awesome. So, Somrat, let's just dive in. Why is headcount management and headcount planning an important process, right? Given that you have worked at 50% organization all the way to a 3,000, 4,000 plus organization, right? From your perspective, from now leading a business as a GM, why do you think companies should indulge in headcount planning?
Well, I think strategy is really about people. And I think that in order to execute any strategy and in order to achieve any business outcome, you need to have the right people in the right roles, with the right functional design, with the right levels and the right management structure. And so to me, planning, particularly around what type of organization are you actually trying to build, can really dictate the success of your business.
So, when we speak to talent leaders, HR leaders, and I've been spending time with finance leaders, they are all talking about budgeting, and then they are all talking about planning as more of a very contained once a year or maybe twice a year kind of an exercise. But given that you are running the whole business and you have a finance team, you have a HR team, and you have a recruiting team that all bubble up to you and report into you, what is your process at the beginning of the year? And you also mentioned that you should do continuous planning. So what has worked for you that can be, a blueprint for leaders that are listening onto this call today?
Really, it starts with the leadership. And what has worked well is really starting with thinking about org design by removing the people out of the equation first, right? Like, what is the right org design that can help align to the outcomes you're trying to achieve? And so I kind of institutionalized this independent process that leaders kind of go through, where our managers are ultimately defining their orgs and their functions, and they're going through their independent thought process of what they think they need to achieve, knowing that at one abstraction level higher, I might be changing things up. But I look at that as just various inputs to what is the optimal design by also learning and listening from our leaders. Once we get through an effective org design process, the next thing we're trying to do is to understand what is the actual headcount people are requesting. This is typically done not through something that I'm proud of, but lots of spreadsheets. These spreadsheets become a starting point of a next level conversation around prioritization. And prioritization is interesting because prioritization starts at sort of two levels. One is what is the priorities within the actual functional department, and then there is the leaders kind of coming together and prioritizing against all departments. And so leaders kind of have to operate with an understanding across all various functional teams and units. And I think it's really important as leaders is that we are we're kind of listening and we're learning from each other. We're kind of calibrating each other. Like what are our goals? What are our outcomes? And how do we get there? And what are the people strategies that needs to go to ultimately achieve it? Now, ultimately, what we're trying to do is saying, here's the plan. And if we hire these people, we can get to these outcomes. But then we kind of have to triangulate and say, well, it depends on the budget that we have. I'm not the only business unit across Gusto, so there's all types of other teams that are also trying to grow and have their own goals to achieve. And so ultimately, we get an envelope, and we have influenced that envelope by sharing sort of scenarios. Right? Here's the best case scenario if we grow our team in this specific way, and here's the strategy behind it, and here's the org design and so forth. Then here's the one outcome. Here's the low case. If we have this type of team, here's what we can be. Ultimately, those are inputs that ultimately finance can't take into consideration. The reason why I talk about it as an ongoing thing is because as your business evolves, right, as you achieve, your interim milestones towards the longer plan, you're constantly asking yourself, is this the design of the team? Is this the optimal way that we should work? Do we have a room for improvements in this functional area, that functional area? And are we finding new needs in this business that we previously have, missed? I mean, as much as you go through a planning process and you've articulated what you think you need, you learn things because that's the process of building a business team, is that you learn things and then you got to say, well, I need to have these 2 or 3 headcount. And then it becomes an ongoing process of, well, what headcount, that was not previously in the plan. And then now we have to add this other count. What we thought that fit into the budget. So we have to remove a headcount. And so I always think of headcount planning as an always on activity.
Got it. So there's a lot to unpack there, but let me summarize. I think the key point that I understood here is that what is very different was instead of starting with the top-down budget and then try to shoehorn headcount around that budget, I really like the idea that how you're starting from the needs and the requirements and allowing your leaders and your teams to come up with more of a bottoms-up plan. Like, hey, what do we need to go and become successful and deliver on your goal? And you mentioned something called as effective org design. And I know you and I have had multiple conversations around these, which have spanned many hours. Given the time that we have today, can you share a little bit more about that effective org design process?
So effective org design, I'm still learning what it means to be effective. But what I will say is the way I think about this is what's the right organizational structure that really creates clarity of function, roles, and responsibilities across different functional teams to get to an aligned outcome. And that really ties to the initiatives that you're ultimately driving, both in near-term horizons and longer-term horizons. You kind of have to think about both things in both ways. And so you have to have the foresight, not only in terms of what is required for the next quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters, 4 quarters, but you're also trying to understand how that org can change over time. I think sometimes what happens is we miss the next organizational design. And so the way that we have operated this within our team today, and I have great leaders that I have the unique fortune to work with, is we go through at least once a quarter, me and some other leaders within our team, I have an amazing co-GM that I work closely with, and we're always talking about the problems with the way that we operate, and the challenges that we're facing to achieve those business outcomes. And we're just scenario planning various types of ways that the organization design can achieve a better outcome. There's a lot of messiness in terms of building a business. And so, we don't have any rocket science behind this. We build slide decks. We, on a quarterly basis, we kind of think about functional teams and design. We talk about the maturity of those functional areas. We talk about different types of functional reporting structures. We discuss possible ways to think about those reporting structures in the context of our people. And in some cases, we just talk about it and we kind of put it in a corner and we say, okay, great. Well, that's good. We're talking about this because at some point we'll go back and say, and this is every quarter, we kind of come back and say, hey, do we need to actually make a change? Like, do we actually need to make a change? Sometimes that happens or ad hoc because there's people changes in our business and team and we have to kind of operate fairly quickly. But by the way, that notion is actually of like building an org chart of functional departments minus the people is actually something we do at leadership levels too. So it's not only at where the co-GMs kind of operate and kind of work with our people team and to kind of align around, but we're also doing that with our leaders because we want to scale the way that we think about this, right? It's not just about, me sort of thinking about some all teams. Obviously the leadership that we have is extremely incredible and have their own perspective. So, ultimately that translates to a spreadsheet and then it becomes a very messy process there because, the org design and the spreadsheet are ultimately disconnected. And then, it becomes this interesting dynamic of like, how do you keep the spreadsheet and the org chart kind of constantly evolving, especially maybe in the beginning, it sounds like nice and clean. And then we have to make a change and then everything kind of gets out of sync and it takes a lot of work to ensure that we're kind of building our own mental processes to ensure that these capabilities are in sync in terms of, especially if new roles are coming in and we had to cancel a role or we had to deprioritize or we had to push a hire date out. There's all types of things that we're doing as our business evolves as we achieve things in our plan.
So that's great. So you said the org chart slide deck is connected to a spreadsheet or you try to map it back to a spreadsheet. So, but you are using, you already have like an HRIS system that you would be using. Is there why build the org chart in a slide deck and not use a more traditional org chart product? Like, what do you think is the missing link there?
You can't do that. I mean, the tools that exist today, Workday, and I don't have experience with other platforms. They're just the final input, right? Like, hey, now I need to get like a job requisition in, and I need to like get approval. It's kind of like the last step. And the beauty of sometimes an empty slide that's just a white screen is you can put it square, you can connect dots and so forth. Effectively that process of collaboration, that process of exploration of potential scenarios it's constantly an evolving thing. And you're collecting new inputs, you're collecting new people inputs, and then ultimately you're kind of like rethinking about it. But the reason why we're doing things in spreadsheets and slide decks is ultimately because, planning to me is a collaborative process. It is a process where leaders are coming together, both business leaders, finance, and the people team come together to align on what's the right people strategy to achieve this outcome. That process is just as important, if not the most important part, then the final step to say, we have this headcount plan approved, and here's the 50 people that you need to hire. And by the way, I can definitely talk about what happens even after that, because there's a lot of mechanisms that need to be done at that point as well.
That's, I think, a very natural progression, right? Let's say we've gone through this org design process. Now we have some sort of a plan, but now we are starting to operationalize it on a day-to-day basis. So you have, there is an applicant tracking system where you get all the information about what is being hired right now, what is being actively being worked on. And then you have maybe your spreadsheet, which is your original approved hiring plan. And then you can educate us on a little bit more on how it works all in Workday. But how do you keep all of these things in sync? Like, if you want to know right now,
it's very challenging. Quite frankly, I don't know if it's ever in sync. But I'll share what we are doing to the best of our ability to be consistent with what's happening. So once we get approval on a plan, there is a system of record of what those job requisitions are, and ultimately those job requisitions are connected with finance and already approved, and then they all have to get inputted into our ATS platform. Now, the challenge from operationalizing this is now that we have a bunch of approved plans, approved headcount, we are not the ones that are hiring, right? We are now, we have invite partners who are effectively our recruiting partners who are amazing at what they do. And then we have the managers that are ultimately accountable to those filling those positions. The challenge for us, and one way we solve this, I'll talk about, is that it's really hard to get full visibility to all the things that are happening across all this various headcount, right? Let's say you have let's say there's 30 or 40 headcount that's open. Which ones actually has an invite partner? Sometimes it's a simple question. Do we have a recruiting partner for this specific role? It's hard to get insights into sometimes. And then even if there is a recruiting partner assigned to a role, how's it going? It's a simple question. Like, are we, most of the times when we're building our financial plan, we're targeting a specific hire date. Like, our budget is tied to achieving an outcome by a hire date with a specific level. And so the question is, are we going to hit that hire date? Are we on target to hit that hiring plan? Because that's an important output to achieve our business outcomes. And so there isn't a way to sort of, at least today, to easily stitch all these things together. And so we have a recurring meeting with various leaders where we kind of go through every headcount, and ultimately we're asking our people partner, especially on the invite side, and we're looking for such point of contact. But keep in mind, these roles can span multiple departments, right? That have very different recruiting processes. And ultimately we're saying, hey, can you give us a red, yellow, green against these roles against the hire date? And ultimately what we're trying to ask ourselves as leaders is, do they need help? Do our managers need help? Are the right resources applied to the right roles? Do we have to make tough calls? And this is also the time where we said, hey, we have a new request that is important to fill, because once again, hey, you could be 2 months in, even 1 month into the plan, and all of a sudden there's an oversight because that's just business. And we have to figure out, well, what do we do about this new headcount? And, are we going to, remember, we have all these pre-approved. Do we replace an existing headcount, replace it with something else? So it's a very messy process. We're using meetings. There's a lot of manual processes to look across the ETS system, and there isn't a single platform to ultimately bring it all together. But it is something that we have done the best job we can through our spreadsheet process. And, it works, right? It's imperfect, but it works, but it clearly has a lot of room for improvement.
Great. So now we've spent a lot of time talking about from a leader's perspective, how you think about headcount planning. How do you communicate with your leadership? But if we also have HR leaders and talent leaders, recruiting leaders who will be listening. From your perspective, what advice or what request do you have for them? What would you ask them what can they do to work better with CEOs and GMs of businesses? because I think they are a very critical part of this, right? I think HR is needed for the org design to give you feedback. Recruiting and talent is needed to give you feedback on whether they'll be able to meet the deadlines that you have set. And that connects it all together, that if you cannot hire people on time, then you cannot hit your business goals. So what are the best ways what they can do to work with GMs and CEOs and also department and functional leaders?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing, I think, is just having a culture of shared accountability. We're all helping each other out to achieve, we all have the same shared outcomes. We all want to grow our business. We all want to hit the various goals that are in front of us. And quite frankly, we won't be able to achieve any of those things without the amazing partners that you mentioned. But it takes effort, it takes commitment. And so I would say for the HR teams that are out there, I think it's important to really learn about the business and learn about the challenges in the business, and ultimately build a strong partnership with your business counterparts that are ultimately, whether they're an EPD or in a functional domain, really try to understand what's going on and help them think through the people dynamics that they have to prepare for, both near term and longer term. But that only can be achieved if you really understand the business outcomes and what's happening in the business. So try to go really deep into the mechanics of the business and the challenges that are happening there, so you can really build some empathy to why the headcount is what it is, and why there's a need to hire certain headcount with certain levels and certain times. That empathy will be more realized once there's sort of clarity of thought to the plan. It's the relationship at the end of the day matters. The more our finance and HR business partners have a deep understanding about the nature of our business, where we are, where we need to go, and the trade-offs that we can make, the stronger partnership we'll have. And I've had the great fortune to have some amazing business partners over my time here at Gusto, but even in other companies in the past, and even the companies that I've built. So that's probably some advice that I would give.
That's great. So closing thoughts, the world has changed. The macroeconomic situation does not allow for you to spend infinite amount of money. So now budgets are constrained, but the need for the business to grow at a certain multiple states. You have to build new features, you have to hire people, you have to grow revenue, but there's not a lot of money to spend. So in this environment, is there a new way you're thinking about headcount management and headcount planning? Are there any best practices, or again, parting advice on how should one adjust their strategy?
I mean, I think everything's about prioritization, and prioritization of strategic bet, where you need to focus. And ultimately, it starts with strategy and knowing what to cut versus where to double down. And ultimately, once those strategic decisions are made, the people outcomes kind of comes, drive from there. I will say at the end of the day, we are also human, and I think everyone cares for their people and everyone cares for their teams. And so you have to really think about how to make those tough choices and balance between what we know versus where do we think the market's going to be. But everything comes down with a trade-off. And I think that one thing we can all do in these moments, given what's happening in the market, is just be very true to the trade-off that you're making, and really make sure you do that with open eyes. In all cases, everything's a trade-off. So just be honest with yourself, be honest with your cross-functional partners, be open and share and communicate. And I think my experience of great teams is that open dialogue, that level of transparency is where the magic all happens.
That's great. Thank you so much, Somrat. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.